They say laughter is the sound of love, but that night, it sounded like betrayal. I stood in the hallway, my hands still wet from washing the dinner dishes, when I heard them. My son Michael and my daughter Jasmine laughing in the living room. My name floated between their chuckles like a ghost. "She's getting forgetful," Michael said. "Yeah, maybe it's time," Jasmine replied softly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We could find a nice home, one with nurses, activities, better for her." My heart didn't just drop, it cracked. They were talking about me, their mother, the woman who worked 2 jobs to feed them, who stayed up through nights of fever and homework, who never let them see how hard it was to raise them alone after their father walked out. And now, they wanted to put me in a home? I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just listened. The TV flickered with a game show. Laughter filled the room, theirs and the one on screen, blending into a cruel echo. "We'll talk to her after the weekend," Jasmine said. "It's for her own good," Jasmine said. For my own good? Those words burned hotter than any insult. I stepped back quietly, my slippers whispering against the wooden floor. My house, the one I'd paid off just 5 years ago, suddenly felt smaller, colder. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the half-empty glass of sweet tea, and something inside me hardened. If they thought I was weak, I'd show them exactly who they were dealing with. I decided right then and there to play along. If they wanted to believe I was fragile, I'd give them fragile. If they wanted to test me, I'd let them. And when the time came, I'd remind them who built the life they were trying to take away from me. Because this story wasn't going to end with me sitting in some sterile room waiting for visiting hours. No, honey, this story was going to end my way. The morning after that conversation, I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet, like it already knew what I was about to do. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black and strong, the way I've always liked it, and looked around my kitchen. Everything in here had a story. The chipped mug Michael made in 5th grade, the burnt mark on the counter from Jasmine's first attempt at pancakes, the old calendar still hanging on April 2018, the year their father died. I took a deep breath. If my own children thought I was losing control, I'd give them a show they'd never forget. That day, I started acting. When Jasmine called to check in, I forgot where I'd put the phone. When Michael came by with groceries, I stared at the milk carton and asked, "Did I buy this yesterday?" They exchanged worried looks, exactly what I wanted. But behind those confused eyes, I saw something else: guilt. And guilt, my dear, is the most powerful teacher there is. The first week, I let them believe I was slipping. I left the stove on once, accidentally misplaced my keys, and once even asked Jasmine if she'd met her father lately, though the man had been gone for years. By day 7, they were talking more softly around me, treating me like glass. And every time I caught their glances, I smiled inside. Because what they didn't know was that I had a plan. I started journaling everything: their visits, their words, their silences. If they were going to put me in a home, I wanted a record of every little thing that led us there. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but something told me I'd need proof of how this all began. Then, one afternoon, Michael brought me a brochure. "Mom, it's just a trial visit," he said. "There's a beautiful place up in Silver Oaks. It's not what you think." I looked at the glossy paper. Smiling elderly folks, yoga mats, bright gardens. They made it look like paradise. But I knew better. It was a soft cage, wrapped in politeness. So I smiled and said, "All right, baby, maybe I'll visit." His relief was immediate, his shoulders relaxing. Jasmine even kissed my cheek. They thought they were winning. But that night, I pulled out my old laptop, the one they assumed I barely knew how to use, and started researching. Not about nursing homes, about law, about rights, about power of attorney. They thought they were losing my memory. In truth, I was finding my strength. The brochure didn't lie. Silver Oaks looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Manicured lawns, bright flowers, and a fountain that hummed like a lullaby. The kind of place where silence had a price tag. Jasmine parked the car, beaming like she'd done something noble. "See, Mom? Isn't it lovely?" Lovely, yes, if you didn't mind trading your freedom for daily yoga classes and scheduled naps. I stepped out slowly, holding my purse close. My bones ached, not from age, but from anger I had to hide. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and lavender. A woman in pastel scrubs greeted us with a smile too wide to be real. "Welcome to Silver Oaks, Mrs. Matthews. We're so glad you're visiting." Visiting. I held on to that word like a promise. They gave me a tour, the dining hall, the common room, the memory garden. The other residents smiled politely, some staring too long, as if they saw through my polite disguise. Then, near the back patio, I met Evelyn. She was sitting alone, knitting something that looked like a half-finished scarf. Her eyes were sharp, observant, the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. "First time here?" she asked, not looking up. "Just visiting," I replied. She smiled, a knowing little curve of the lips. That's what we all said. For the first time that day, I felt something stir inside me. Curiosity. We talked about everything. Her kids, her late husband, how she'd been brought here for her own good. Her story sounded like mine, too much like mine. By the time Jasmine came to fetch me, Evelyn leaned closer and whispered, "If you ever end up here, don't play by their rules. They'll treat you like you're fading. Don't let them. Make them see you." Those words followed me all the way home. That night, while Jasmine and Michael congratulated themselves for how well the visit went, I sat in my room, staring at the business card the nurse had slipped into my hand. Silver Oaks Senior Living, Administrative Office. And on the back, scribbled in pen, "They hide more than smiles here. E." I didn't know what that meant yet, but something told me that this home my kids were so eager for wasn't as innocent as it looked, and I wasn't going to be the next one trapped behind those polished doors. I told my kids I'd give Silver Oaks a chance. Their relief was instant. Michael even hugged me for the first time in months. "It'll be good for you, Mom," he said softly. "You'll meet people, get some rest." Rest, as if 60 meant surrender. 3 days later, I packed a small suitcase, some clothes, my journal, and my late husband's photo. The house felt too quiet when I left, but I promised myself I'd come back stronger. When I arrived, Evelyn was waiting near the entrance. "Didn't think you'd actually come back," she said, smiling. "Didn't think I would either," I replied. She laughed, a low, knowing sound. "Then welcome to the Garden of Secrets, Gloria." The first few days at Silver Oaks were deceptively calm. Morning yoga, group puzzles, movie nights, everything perfectly timed, perfectly polite. Too perfect. But Evelyn had warned me, watch what happens after lights out. So I did. On my third night, I pretended to be asleep. At exactly 10:30 p.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, measured, deliberate. Then a quiet voice. "Room 214, check medication levels." My room was 215. I peeked through the half-open door and saw 2 staff members wheeling a cart. They stopped at a door across the hall, entered silently, and stayed inside for nearly 15 minutes. When they came out, one of them whispered, "The dosage was adjusted. She won't remember anything tomorrow." My stomach turned cold. The next morning, I found Evelyn in the garden, watering the roses like nothing happened. You saw them, didn't you? She asked quietly. I nodded. What are they doing to people here? Evelyn looked me dead in the eyes. They're testing memory drugs. Most of these residents are being used like lab rats, and their families don't even know. I felt the ground shift under me. It wasn't just about keeping me safe. It was about control, power, money. That evening, I sat in my room, my hands trembling as I opened my journal. Page after page, I began to write. Every whisper, every face, every detail. If my children ever forced me to stay here, they would unknowingly be handing me over to something far darker than loneliness. And if that happened, I'd make sure the world knew what really went on behind Silver Oak's smiling doors. They thought I was one of the quiet ones, a woman too tired to fight, too gentle to ask questions. That's exactly what I wanted them to think. Every day I smiled, nodded, took my vitamins, and played bingo like a good little resident. But at night, I wrote. Every whisper in the hallway, every light that flickered too long, every resident who suddenly moved out and was never mentioned again. It started with Evelyn, of course. She slipped me a small piece of paper during breakfast one morning, folded under my napkin. It read, Room 306, trusts you. That evening, I found Room 306, a woman named Marjorie Dean, a retired librarian with a sharp memory and an even sharper tongue. She told me she'd seen the same thing: night visits, unexplained sedatives, nurses changing charts. Soon, there were 5 of us. 5 women who pretended to be losing our minds, but were, in truth, piecing the whole puzzle together. We met in the memory garden after dark, when the cameras pointed away. Evelyn called us the Whisper Network. They think we're fading, she said one night, her voice low. Let's give them a reason to fear what's left of our memories. We started collecting evidence. Phone photos hidden in knitting bags, voice recordings slipped into medical carts, copies of resident logs tucked under flower pots. Every detail we found painted a darker picture. Silver Oaks wasn't just a senior facility. It was part of a research partnership with a pharmaceutical company called Novera Biotech. They were using certain patients in memory drug trials, changing doses without consent, and falsifying data. Most families didn't visit enough to notice. Those who did were told their loved ones were declining naturally. But not us. We saw everything. Still, I knew I couldn't stay here long. My children were planning to make the move official next month. I overheard Jasmine on the phone. The paperwork's almost ready. Mom's adjusted well. It's time. It stung, deeply, but that pain became fuel. If they wanted me here, then I'd use their decision to bring this whole operation down. One night, as I stared out my window, Evelyn whispered, "You ready to fight back?" I turned to her, calm, steady, unafraid. "I've been fighting my whole life," I said. "This time, I just plan to win." The storm didn't come from the sky. It came from inside the walls of Silver Oaks. Evelyn and I had gathered enough proof to burn the place down. Photos of falsified dosage sheets, names of patients who vanished, and bank transfers from Novera Biotech to the facility's director, Dr. Raymond Kessler. But proof means nothing without exposure. We needed someone outside. That's when I thought of Jasmine. It sounds strange, doesn't it, to trust the same daughter who wanted to put me here? But I knew my children, and I knew guilt better than anyone. If Jasmine saw what was happening, really saw it, her heart would turn. So I wrote her a letter. Not an email, those could be tracked. A handwritten letter sealed in a birthday card with a small USB drive taped inside. The drive contained our evidence: photos, voice recordings, scanned documents, everything. I sent it through a nurse I'd quietly befriended, a young single mom named Sharon, who worked double shifts and understood desperation when she saw it. She mailed it for me, no questions asked. For 2 days, I waited. No reply. Then came the meeting. Dr. Kessler called me into his office. His smile was tight, his eyes colder than the marble desk between us. "Mrs. Matthews," he said smoothly, "it seems you've been busy." My heart froze. He held up a printout, my letter. Jasmine had forwarded it. Not to the police, not to the press, to him. "Your children are concerned about your mental health," he continued, his tone dripping with false pity. "Perhaps it's time we adjust your medication." I realized in that moment how deeply alone I truly was. He didn't call security, he didn't yell, that would be too obvious. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're a clever woman, Gloria, but clever women forget this place belongs to us." That night, I didn't sleep. The Whisper Network gathered in the garden, faces pale under the moonlight. Evelyn's hands trembled. "He knows," she said. "He'll come after all of us." I looked at each of them, my unlikely sisters in rebellion. "Then we do what we always do," I said. "We act like harmless old ladies. Let them think we're harmless while we plan their downfall." But fear was real. 2 days later, Marjorie, our librarian, was transferred to another wing. No one saw her again. Evelyn cried that night, quietly into her pillow. Me? I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. I wrote a new plan, one that no one, not even my children, could interfere with. Because if I wanted justice, I couldn't count on anyone's conscience. I would need the one thing I had left: my rage, my mind, and a lifetime of knowing exactly how people underestimate women like me. They always underestimated us because we looked like retirement on 2 legs, cardigan sleeves, soft voices, 1,000 polite apologies for taking up space. That's been the trick since forever. Make them comfortable with your silence, then watch how easily they hand you the keys to their arrogance. I leaned into that trick like a seasoned actor. For weeks, I played the role, confused, forgetful, sometimes tearful. I let the staff see my notebook full of grocery lists and crossword clues. I misplaced reading glasses I wasn't even wearing. I stammered when they asked about dates. The little performance made them soft, their guard down. When a place has power, it's because people hand it to them on a silver platter. But while they saw the act, the Whisper Network moved in the wings. We worked in shifts. One of us would draw attention at bingo. Another would slip into the medication room when the night nurse turned away. Sharon, God bless her, brought in a cheap recorder taped inside the lining of her jacket. Evelyn, with fingers nimble from knitting for decades, could lift a file and fold it back into place before anyone noticed. I learned to read the staff the way I'd read my children's faces. Tiny tells, shifts in tone, the way a hand twitched when someone hid a truth. Our plan was simple and dangerous. We'd create a spectacle, a diversion so big the administration would be forced to look one way while we moved the evidence the other. First, I needed them to believe I was really fading, so I upped my act. I missed meals and whispered about losing small things. I let my phone disappear. Michael actually found it under the couch and shook his head like a man who'd already mourned his mother. The staff started charting my decline in bright red on their screens. Once they had that trophy, documented decline, they grew careless. Dr. Kessler smiled more easily around me. Nurses reduced their caution. That's when Evelyn and I staged the biggest smokescreen of all. It happened on a Tuesday, a day when relatives mostly didn't visit. Sharon gave me a paper bag and told me it had soap. Inside, she'd tucked a folded hospital gown. I changed under the flimsy curtain in the common room while a soap opera blared on TV. I coughed, I paused, I made the faint gasping of an old woman. Then I slipped out to the garden under the pretense of getting fresh air. A camera in the corridor watched the cough, the shuffle, the wrinkled gown. The footage would be used later to prove how much they believed me. While I played the patient, Evelyn and Marjorie, with the quiet precision of women who had cataloged 1,000 library books, made their move. They used the night shift's keys, borrowed from a flirty aide who didn't know his charm was currency, and opened the records room. It smelled of bleach and paper and the iced breath of locked things. Paper is heavy with truth. It weighs the same, no matter who wishes it away. They found patient charts, transferred spreadsheets, the Novera deposit logs. They found an internal memo where Dr. Kessler had written, in a scrawled hand, writing, "Reduce transparency, families overreacting." They found an invoice trail showing payments from Novera routed through a shell company in another state. They copied everything, snapped photos with a pocket camera like amateur archaeology, and replaced the files exactly as they found them. But moving paper is only half a revolution. You need witnesses who can't be dismissed as senile. That's where my kids came in, unwillingly. I fed Michael a story. I let him find my phone and the fake text I'd sent myself about forgetting to pay a bill. He was flattered to be helpful. I let Jasmine witness me stumble in the hallway, tearful one evening on purpose. She called, concerned, and I let her overhear a staff member say, "She's worse tonight, maybe it's time." Guilt gnawed at her. It does to good people. That guilt would loosen tongues. Then we struck the match. At midnight, Evelyn uploaded the copied files to a cloud drive using Sharon's credentials and a burner tablet the Whisper Network had procured from the friends of a friend. We sent everything, spreadsheets, audio, photos, to an account we controlled. I wrote 2 emails under assumed names. One to a state health inspector, another to a local reporter I'd once given a casserole plate to at church, a young woman named Tori who covered human interest stories. Tori was the kind who couldn't ignore people when they asked for justice. We also created a fake incident outside the cafeteria the next afternoon. Marjorie, whose lungs had grown thin but whose voice hadn't, had a sudden fall. It was staged, of course, a careful drop that left no broken bones but plenty of messy visibility. The paramedics came, Dr. Kessler came running. Sharon, as if by chance, filmed the commotion and uploaded the clip to our cloud. Tori got the email at 3:07 p.m. By 5 p.m., she was walking through Silver Oak's front doors with a press badge that flashed like an accusation. The administration tried at first to perform damage control. They offered interviews, smiles sharpened into scripts. "Everything here is in compliance," they told the camera, their lips saying safety while the flicker in their eyes told a different story. Tori listened, asked hard questions, and then turned her recorder toward me. "Mrs. Matthews," she said softly, "your children told me you've been having trouble remembering. Do you want to tell me about it?" I could have played the part further. I could have let the camera see me frail. Instead, I looked Tori straight in the eye and said, "I remember everything I need to remember." Then I pulled the USB from my cardigan, the one Jasmine thought had my favorite hymn saved on it, and offered it to her like a sacrament. Her face went white as she plugged the drive into her laptop. The room hummed with the electricity of truth. Files loaded, audio played, staff discussing dosage adjustments in hushed tones, a spreadsheet linking Novera payments to the director's account, a list of eligible residents for the trial. Tori's jaw clenched. The camera panned the faces of the board members who'd been invited to speak, and for the first time, they looked small. News travels fast when the internet smells blood. Within 24 hours, Silver Oaks had a reporter camped in its parking lot. Families who'd been told their loved ones were settling in came with lawyers. The phone started ringing off the hook with complaints. The state inspector opened a formal inquiry. But power plays have a cost. Dr. Kessler didn't lose his composure. He retaliated in a way that cut deeper than revoking privileges. He used the system, the very system that makes it easy to quiet a woman in her 60s. He filed for an emergency guardianship hearing. He painted me, in official documents, as increasingly incapacitated with impaired judgment, and he named the facility's director as an interested party in my care. In other words, he aimed to bind me legally into the very cage I was trying to expose. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy knocked at my door with a court notice. Michael read it over my shoulder, and his face went pale.
"Mom," he whispered, "this is serious." It was. The law, with its folded language and polite indifference, can move faster than outrage. I learned quickly that scandal doesn't always free you. Sometimes it forces the fight into brighter, meaner arenas. The state could investigate, the press could howl, but judges could sign papers that ignore both. I sat at my kitchen table with that court notice pressed to my chest and thought about all the times I'd let the world decide what I could be. 60 years had taught me how people use care as a weapon. I had friends in the church, a few lawyers who owed me favors, and the Whisper Network. But I needed a strategy that would survive a courtroom. So we pivoted. Evelyn arranged for a live stream. Not a mainstream station, those might cave to pressure, but a grassroots network that Tori trusted. We scheduled a Friday afternoon sit-down. Me, Evelyn, Sharon, and the files on a tablet in front of a camera that went directly to people's living rooms. We aimed straight at hearts and home screens. To win, you have to risk everything. And I was ready.
The morning of the hearing, the air felt like static, the kind that builds before lightning splits the sky. I woke up at 5 a.m., too early even for the birds outside my window. My heart was calm, but my hands trembled slightly as I poured my coffee. 60 years of life teaches you the difference between fear and readiness. One makes you hide, the other sharpens your focus. I wore a navy blue suit I hadn't put on since my husband's funeral. The fabric still smelled faintly of cedar and old church hymns. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim or a confused woman in decline. I saw a grandmother who had buried her husband, raised 2 children, survived the loss of everything that once defined her, and was still standing. Michael insisted on driving me to court. Jasmine came too, silent, guilt heavy in her eyes. The silence between them was thick, but I didn't feel it. Sometimes silence teaches better than any sermon. The courthouse smelled of coffee, printer ink, and old fear. The benches creaked beneath nervous bodies. At the front sat Dr. Kessler and the facility's attorney, both in dark suits that screamed confidence. They didn't look at me as I entered, which told me everything. People who underestimate you rarely can stomach eye contact. Judge Raymond was an older man with a reputation for efficiency, not empathy. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the papers before him, and said, "Let's proceed." Kessler's lawyer went first. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with the polished tone of someone who argued hundreds of cases like this one. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a matter of ensuring Mrs. Matthews' safety. She has exhibited confusion, paranoia, and delusional behavior, accusing staff of conspiracies. We have documented incidents and corroborating witness statements." He handed over a folder, photos of my staged confusion, notes from manipulated staff, even a transcript of me forgetting my own phone. They'd turned my performance into evidence against me. My stomach turned, but my face stayed calm. You never show fear to those who profit from it. Then came my turn. My lawyer, a woman named Lydia Green, was barely 30, but sharp as a scalpel. She stood, smiled faintly, and said, "Your Honor, Mrs. Matthews may appear frail, but make no mistake, she is fully capable, and she has proof that what the facility calls paranoia is, in fact, awareness." Lydia motioned to the screen. Evelyn, from the audience, nodded and clicked play. The courtroom filled with the recorded voices we'd captured. Quote, "Adjust dosages quietly, no paper trail." Quote, "Make sure the Matthews file is locked." Quote, "If the families find out, it's on us." The words echoed against the wooden walls like ghosts refusing burial. Dr. Kessler's composure cracked, just slightly, the twitch of a jaw muscle, the tightening of a fist. Lydia continued, her voice rising. "These recordings, along with the financial records Mrs. Matthews' group uncovered, show a pattern of deceit and exploitation. Silver Oaks received undisclosed payments from a pharmaceutical subsidiary, Novera, for unauthorized drug trials. My client and others were misled, monitored, and nearly silenced." The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Do you have evidence these payments were connected to patient treatment?" Without a word, Evelyn held up a printed invoice, the one with Dr. Kessler's signature.
Silence. Then murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The reporter, Tori, sitting quietly in the back, scribbled like her pen was on fire. Kessler's lawyer objected, sputtering about privacy and chain of custody, but the damage was done. The judge called for order, but the truth was already out of its cage. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The judge turned to me directly. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, "you've been at the center of serious allegations. Do you have anything you wish to say before I make my ruling?" I stood slowly, my knees ached, but my spine was steel. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "All my life, people have mistaken quiet for weakness. When my husband died, everyone said I'd fade away. When I got older, my children joked about my memory. But I remember everything. Every time someone called me fragile, every time a woman was told to sit down and be grateful for the care she didn't ask for. Silver Oaks isn't just about me. It's about how easily society locks away people once they stop producing profit." The judge studied me for a long moment. The room was so still you could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. Then he said softly, "Mrs. Matthews, the court finds no sufficient evidence of incapacity. The guardianship petition is denied." Michael exhaled loudly, half relief, half shame. Jasmine started to cry quietly. Dr. Kessler's lawyer muttered something about appeals, but even he knew it was over. As we stepped outside, cameras flashed, voices shouted, "Mrs. Matthews, Gloria, how does it feel to win?" I smiled, but not with joy. It wasn't victory yet, just survival. "This isn't about winning," I said. "It's about being heard." That night, Silver Oaks Board suspended Dr. Kessler pending investigation. The local news called it the Matthews case. Families began pulling their relatives out of the facility in waves. Lawsuits multiplied like spring rain. But behind the headlines, something else was happening. Something quieter, more profound. Messages flooded my phone. Women from other homes, nurses, daughters, strangers, all whispering the same thing. "We heard you. I thought I was the only one. How did you do it?" And that's when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was the beginning of something bigger. Because when one old woman refuses to be silenced, the whole system trembles.
The victory left a ringing in my ears that lasted for days. Not the sweet kind, but the kind that follows a gunshot. It told you something had changed, and that the silence that came after it would never be the same. News vans parked on my street for 3 mornings straight. Neighbors I'd known my whole life stopped me on the sidewalk with casseroles and handshakes and too many questions. People wanted to be close to the woman who had walked into a courtroom and refused to be written out. I wanted to be quiet. That's the hard part about suddenly being loud. You still know how to be quiet well, and sometimes the weight of both sits on your chest at the same time. But the world had turned toward us, and turning meant work. The state inspector's team moved through Silver Oaks with clipboards and cameras. Families pulled loved ones and marched out with suitcases and determined faces. The board of directors called emergency meetings of their own and produced statements full of words that tried to sound like confession without committing to the action that makes things right. Novera Biotech froze accounts and hired attorneys. Dr. Kessler, who had once walked the halls like a small god, entered a different building, one with bars on the windows. And the headlines called him fired, while the indictment read, "charged with fraud and endangering vulnerable adults." Headlines do a strange thing. They shrink complicated people into easy nouns. He had been more than a noun to us. He'd been a thief. The Whisper Network became a name people used with affection and astonishment. Tori's story went national because she kept leveraging it, connecting with public interest reporters who had less fear of the power than some of the local outlets. Lydia Green, my young lawyer with eyes like a hawk, organized pro bono teams to help the families file complaints, and a lawyer in Atlanta who owed a favor for a church casserole suddenly found himself on TV explaining how guardianship laws can be weaponized. I watched a system inch and then shove toward accountability. But victories cost more than journalists realize. They cost sleep, privacy, and sometimes the very people you're trying to protect.
Michael came by one afternoon with the same distracted look gentlemen carry when they've been taught to bury emotion like a spear. He didn't know where to begin with apologies, so he started with small gestures. He fixed the leaky pipe under my sink, he cut the hedges. It was clumsy redemption, but redemption hardly ever looks like a movie. Jasmine, meanwhile, volunteered to take down the posters the protesters had hung on her neighborhood mailbox, cleaner than they'd put them up, and avoided my gaze for days. When she did finally look at me, the sight of her recent tiredness and the new softness in her voice felt like an altar where forgiveness might be offered, not demanded. "You made us look at things we didn't want to see," she said one evening, voice low beside the sink where I was rinsing apples. "I'm sorry." I rinsed and put the apples on the counter. "You didn't make anything, Jazz. People have been doing what they do for a long time. I just moved one light to the corner so we could see it." Her hand found mine. It was small, warm, familiar. "Can you forgive me?" Forgiveness, I had learned, isn't a lightning bolt. It's more often a slow lamp being lit in a dark room. I squeezed her fingers. "I'll try, but you'll have to try too." The bigger battle, though, was public and structural. Legislators, embarrassed and eager to look busy, invited me to testify at a hearing about elder care oversight. I had never thought I would speak in a place with that many microphones, but there I was, my voice steady from all the courtroom practice. I told them what I knew, what we had recorded, what I had seen, with Evelyn and Sharon and Marjorie. My words were simple. Respect and accountability belong to people at any age. A few representatives nodded solemnly. Some tried to trap me in technicalities. But one senator, a woman with calloused hands from decades of working in a community clinic, stood up and promised an oversight committee. Word was that committee would draft real changes: stricter audit requirements for partnerships between facilities and pharmaceutical companies, clearer consent procedures for trials, and better family notification practices. Policy moves slowly. It's not a race, it's an accumulation. Still, watching lawmakers scribble notes felt like watching gardeners plan a new bed. The human work continued too. We established a small hotline for families to call. Tori worked with a nonprofit to get grant money for legal clinics. Sharon, who'd once been precarious on paychecks, enrolled in night classes and loved statistics for some reason I couldn't understand. But I didn't have to understand everything. I just had to support it. Marjorie, the librarian, started an oral history project, interviewing residents about their lives, not their diseases, and those recordings became part of a traveling exhibit on aging with dignity. As for me, I learned how to say no, a small practice with large consequences. I said no to TV talk shows that wanted me to be a sob story. I said no to every interview that wanted to package my life into a tidy moral. I said yes to the small things that nourished me: an afternoon at the farmer's market, the smell of basil in a pot on my windowsill, the weekly phone calls from a niece who had just had her first baby. I began to keep a new journal, not the one full of plans and grudges, but a gratitude diary that listed 3 small things each night. It felt foolish at first, and then necessary. To fight the machine, you need to feed the self.
The strain never fully left. On hard days, when a family member turned away or a legal blockage appeared, I thought of the nights in Silver Oaks when Evelyn and I would sit in the garden and listen for the sound of someone older being ignored. I thought of the women who'd taught me how to braid my hair and how to tell the truth crushed under bad intentions. I thought of my mother, who'd told me when I was young that the world owes you nothing, you have to ask for your share. I had asked. They had given me headlines. I wanted something deeper than headlines, long-term change. So we built it, slowly. The hotline became a nonprofit. The mentorship program received modest local funding and a partnership with a university. State laws tightened in several areas, mostly around trial consent and transparency. Dr. Kessler's trial dragged on, as these things do, full of depositions and experts, and in it, families gave testimony that was small and human and devastating. He received a sentence that sent a clear signal: people in his position would be held accountable. Accountability does not bring back lost time, but it can build the scaffolding others need not to fall. On a wet Thursday morning, months after the first headlines, the church where I'd once taught children overflowed with faces. We were there to open a new wing at a shelter for elders seeking safe placement and legal help. A plaque on the wall read, simply, "The Gloria Matthews Resource Wing." I touched the brass plate with my thumb and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with metal. My body had been through a lot, my heart had been through more, but the plaque meant something, the small, stubborn fact that the work had not been solely about me. My relationship with Michael and Jasmine continued to be repair work. It was slow and often awkward. They apologized, I accepted, and sometimes I forgave. Sometimes I reminded them of the larger work that needed them to be present. I told them once, gently, because that's the way you do with adults who remain your children, you can either help build the world you wish your children will inherit, or you can spend your life wondering who to blame. They began to help. Michael became a trustee on our nonprofit board. Jasmine volunteered at the hotline when she could. They still made mistakes. I still rolled my eyes. But our dinners were warmer, and when Jasmine's child scraped a knee in the yard, I healed more quickly than I could have imagined. If I measure the change, the laws, the programs, the people who no longer tucked the elderly away like old furniture, it's tempting to feel satisfaction. But I know better. Change is a room with windows that open and shut. New problems enter, old ones try to find cracks. The difference now is that the room is occupied. The elders are no longer silent furniture in some people's tidy houses. They have voices. They are seen. On quiet nights, when the rain taps the roof and the house hums, I replay the moments in court, the times I had to steel myself against a world wanting me small. I think of Evelyn, knitting quicker now, laughing more often. I think of Sharon, now in scrubs that read like a uniform for a renewed profession. I think of Marjorie's oral history tapes, now in libraries where young people listen. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear their laughter again, not the cruel laugh that started all this, but the layered laugh of a community that has survived and is now, awkwardly and gloriously, rebuilding. We were not done. There would be more hearings, more committees, more paperwork. There would be new fights. But sitting at my kitchen table that night, with a fresh page of gratitude and a garden that needed pruning, I felt conviction, not the noisy kind, but the durable kind. We had pulled back the velvet curtain in one room, and there were other rooms. I wouldn't pretend to be able to rip every curtain down, but I could teach others how to find the seams. In that silence, I smiled. Because some things are cumulative. A week of courage turns into a month of pressure, which turns into a year of policy. A series of small defenses can become a wall. And when you stand behind walls built by the people they protect, you know the world is safer than it was. We did it our way, loud enough to be heard, steady enough to stay, and kind enough to hold the hands of those who trembled as we passed. Gloria. The morning after my speech to the nursing home residents, I woke up to an inbox full of messages. My story had gone viral. Someone had filmed my talk and posted it online. The title read, "60-year-old woman outsmarts her kids and teaches the world a lesson." There were thousands of comments. "You're my hero. You made me call my mom today. Thank you for showing us that strength doesn't fade with age." I smiled. For the first time in years, the silence of my house didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was shaky. It was from Sarah. "Mom, I watched your video. I cried the entire time. I never realized how much you hurt. I'm sorry. Can I come home? Sarah." I held the letter to my chest and felt something break, but in a good way. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing yourself from the weight of pain. That evening, I cooked her favorite meal, creamy pasta with garlic bread. When the doorbell rang, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door, and there she was. No makeup, red eyes, a woman who finally looked like the little girl I once raised. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. She hugged me so tightly that all those cold years melted away. Later that night, we sat on the porch watching the stars.
"Mom," she said quietly, "you were never a burden. I was just scared of getting old, of losing you." I smiled. That's the thing about fear, sweetheart. It makes us forget who we are. Months passed. Michael called too, apologizing, offering to visit. I said yes, not because I needed them, but because I wanted them to grow better than I did. A year later, I published my memoir. I overheard my kids laughing about putting me in a home, so I played along. It became a bestseller, not because I was famous, but because people saw themselves in my story. Mothers, daughters, sons who forgot that love is not an obligation, but a choice. On the day of the book's release, I stood on the same porch where everything had begun, the place where I once overheard laughter that broke my heart. This time, I laughed too, because now I wasn't the woman left behind, I was the woman who found herself again. Closing line. Sometimes life's cruelest jokes are just disguised lessons, and if you can laugh back, you've already won.